I really want to dig into what's happening in an ADHD brain. And this comes from research from Dr. Ned Hollowell. It comes from Dr. Amen. I know that Huberman Lab just did a bunch of podcast episodes on this, but this is how everybody talks about it. So the good thing about ADHD is it seems like the research that's been going on for decades is very conclusive about the prefrontal cortex and how ADHD impacts it. So let's talk about attention, okay? Because ADHD is not the inability to focus. ADHD is the inability to direct your attention in appropriate ways, in appropriate settings. That's what it means. That's why you'll often see kids with ADHD that can play video games for hours. That was Oakley. Like I could literally be banging pots and pans behind this kid. He wouldn't even know it. He was so focused. But he had an inability to direct that attention in appropriate ways in other cases. And let me just use the example that I just gave you. It's not healthy that he was so focused on video games that he couldn't hear pots and pans. That's not an appropriate use of attention either. And so let's unpack what attention is. So attention is a really important skill, right? You've got to be able to pay attention if you want to be successful at work, if you want to learn new things. You need to be able to direct your attention and in relationships. I mean, just think about it. There are times where somebody's talking and your stomach hurts, or you want to get a bite to eat, or you really don't give a shit and you want to yawn, or you want to interrupt them. Your ability to pay attention and suppress the urge to interrupt them or to yawn or to excuse yourself, that is the skill of attention. And it's critical for relationships. Otherwise, you're going to look like a rude asshole. So attention requires your prefrontal cortex to be able to switch between two neural networks in your brain. One of the neural networks is the part of your brain that is aware and paying attention to everything around you, okay? All the noise around you and all of your thoughts and your feelings in your body, okay? So one neural network that your prefrontal cortex needs to control is the ability to shh all the noise around you and all the noise within you. And I'm going to bring in an example that is used throughout the research with ADHD, and it's the example of an orchestra conductor. So your prefrontal cortex is an orchestra conductor. And I want to just bring in the sound of an orchestra warming up. You hear all the different sounds and like of people, of an orchestra getting ready and unpacking and warming up. That's you in the world. And one thing that your prefrontal cortex does when it comes to attention is it lifts up the little sticks and it points at the horns who are making too much noise and goes, shh. This is called a top-down function. It is able to tap into a neural network to suppress, shh, hey horns, shut the hell up, shh, 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 and silence the noise outside of you and silence the noise within you, your grumbling stomach, your thoughts about what you're doing tonight, so that the prefrontal cortex can then tap into the second neural network, which is the ability to raise up and focus on something specific. Hey, strings, it's time for you. Let's magnify and amplify you, because now the horns, shh, are quiet. We can now amplify the string section and hear it. And so that's the network that allows you, if you crack open a book, you focus on the book itself, but you also focus on the words in your mind and what you're learning and processing as you're reading it. So your prefrontal cortex, when it comes to attention, has to do those two things. The shh of the distractions outside you and the grumbling stomach in you, so that it can turn toward what you want to focus on and direct your attention appropriately. If you can't switch between those two things of the shh and the focus, you can't pay attention. And anybody with ADHD, they're missing the conductor in the brain. You're not able to shh things. You're not able to spotlight on something else in most settings. you have an orchestra that's warming up all the time around you. And that's what the experts mean when they say that you have a neurobiological disorder that affects the brain structurally and chemically, as well as ways in which various parts of the brain communicate with one another. That's what they're talking about. The prefrontal cortex and the inability to switch between suppression of noise and amplification of focus. That's what it is. I can give you an example because I'm realizing my prefrontal cortex could not fucking do this. I went to Dartmouth College, and they have this incredible library, Baker Library, and I would always go to the stacks in the library to study. And I would carry my stack of books, and I would carry my notebooks and my pens and my highlighters, and I would commit to being there all day. Okay, I'm gonna study. I would sit down, and as soon as I sit down and crack open a book, you want to know what happened? The orchestra started warming up, and everyone started chit-chatting. I literally would be like, oh my God, I think I'm hungry. I got to go to the bathroom. Do I feel like studying? I'm not quite sure. And then I'd hear somebody walking and be like, who's that? Oh, is that Emily? Hey, Emily. I was incapable of that part of attention that your prefrontal cortex needs you to do. Shh. I was incapable of suppressing the sensation in my body, suppressing the monologue in my fucking mind, and tuning out and suppressing the noises around me. I would sit there for 8 hours and distract myself because this core function of my prefrontal cortex didn't work. Couldn't do it. So of course I had trouble paying attention because I couldn't suppress my internal and external noise in order to do the second part, where the conductor, the prefrontal cortex, turns to the strings after it's gone shh to the horns and amplifies and ramps up the strings. Let's hear the first stanza. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then they go, right? And that is your prefrontal cortex ramping up and amplifying either your focus in your head, because if I've got the book cracked open, I can't be paying attention to what my voice is saying. I've got to turn on the part of the brain that can now focus on the words on the page, right? I've got to be able to focus on things in the environment, the book in front of me, the words that are being processed as I'm reading. So attention is controlled by the prefrontal cortex, being able to shush and quiet and suppress one network that is tuned in to all of the outside and internal noise, and to amplify another network in your brain that goes into a focus state. My brain did not work that way. It was missing the conductor. And people with ADHD are missing a conductor that's working properly. And when you start to understand that, oh my God, there's this conductor in my brain, and this is the way they talk about it in research, what you realize is this, because it goes a little bit further. Your brain takes a ton of fuel. When you look at the research, if you and I were to simply sit still all day and do nothing, nothing, not even read a book, just sort of lay on the couch, do next to nothing, simply being awake and alive, you consume 25% of your caloric intake. When you start trying to focus, so again, attention is twofold. It takes fuel mentally to suppress the internal fidgeting, the fact that you're hungry, maybe you have to pee, your voice going, oh God, I'm going to screw over this test. Why can't I focus? What's wrong? Oh, is that Emily over there? It takes a lot of mental fuel to quiet that network in your mind. It takes more mental fuel for your prefrontal cortex to then go, hey, strings, we're going to pay attention to you, and to activate a different network that helps you focus on what's happening in your mind and focus on something in your physical environment. This is why after you take a test, you're exhausted, because you've drained the energy tank. And so what also happens for everybody with ADHD is the orchestra's playing. You're burning through fuel because both networks are going. Your attempt to try to focus on something and your attempt to shut down the shit that you can't shut down. And so you're not only spinning your wheels by not actually being able to get done what everybody else can get done, you're also draining the energy tank. What ultimately happens is that you, if you're a woman, turn this against yourself. Guys are like, fuck this homework, and they get physical and they go do something else. Women aim it at themselves. And this is where it gets important, because this is about both being able to quiet certain neural circuits and enhance others. And what they've found, this is from Dr. Amen, who's been on this podcast, one of the world's leading experts in the brain. He's done over 60,000 scans of brains. When he has scanned people's brain, he has scanned my brain. And when you look at anybody's brain scan who has a ADHD brain, what they find is there are what appear to be holes in the prefrontal cortex. It's very, very common. And it's a sign that there's not sufficient blood flow to the conductor. The conductor can't work properly because it's not getting the blood flow that it needs. And he calls this a sleepy brain. That your brain is not getting the blood flow, the dopamine, the norepinephrine, or whatever the hell it's called, because we all know I can't say it. And that's why so many people with ADHD, because we're not able to have all of the neurotransmitters and the neurocircuits working properly. It's why so many of us chase dopamine dumps like shopping or alcohol or any other addictive kind of behavior. And it's also why it matters that women have a symptom of being hyper critical. Because think about the two networks that the conductor in your brain has to be able to switch on and off. Yes, you've got to be able to switch the ability to pay attention to the book and to the words as you're in your mind as you're processing what you're reading. But if you can't turn off what researchers call the default mode network, if you can't shush the fucking horns as they're like, you're never going to amount to anything. Why are you always behind? If you can't shh that, you live with a default mode, a voice in your head that is always active, that's always going, and that's always negative. And that's why so many of us develop such poor self-esteem. It's why the outcomes are horrendous for girls that don't get diagnosed that have ADHD, because you internalize all this shit. If you're an adult going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, this is me, this is me, this is my sister, this is my daughter, this is my boss, this is my colleague, this is my friend. Great, send them this episode. Attached to this episode, like all episodes, is a plethora of resources. And one of the resources that we are going to link to is a self-assessment. This is not how you get diagnosed with ADHD, but this is how you can learn more about ADHD and sort of the surprising symptoms and impacts so that you are more empowered to go seek something. And I would start with your general practitioner and ask them where to go. That's the best place to start, or with a therapist. You can also start with a lot of the online talk therapy platforms. And we've talked a lot about the research showing the lost generation of women, of which I feel like the founding member. That if you are between the ages of, I'm just going to say, 20 and 75, you may be in this generation of women who were either called a tomboy or called aggressive or called scattered or daydreamy, who are really, really hard on yourself. You developed anxiety or depression or an eating disorder, and you've always wondered what the hell is wrong with you. I'm encouraging you, if any of this was resonant, please go talk to your primary care doctor. And again, I know I've said this a number of times. I'm not trying to diagnose you at all, okay? I'm not a doctor. I feel like I'm an expert in this topic because of lived experience. I have watched our daughters and our son struggle. I have lived the struggle, and I feel so much more empowered now that I know what I'm dealing with. And I think the benefits, now that I can address it effectively and in a healthy way, far outweigh having a normal brain, a non-ADHD brain. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I sure as hell wish I would have known about this sooner, because I know it would have prevented unnecessary headaches and heartaches and suffering in my life, And I would like to think that it would have helped me make way healthier and more empowering choices, particularly when I was struggling profoundly during college and law school. I want to tell you a deeply personal story. This is something that happened to me 6 years ago, and it changed the trajectory of my life. This is a very serious issue, particularly for women, because we are profoundly underdiagnosed.